was a scientist, a neurobiologist at La Jolla Institute in California, and in the early 1990s, he kind of rocketed the world with his findings, because anything that has to do with homosexuality is always big headlines. And, his findings weren't that important, as you will see, but anyway. He claimed to have found some microscopic differences in a section of the brain that controls sexual activity called the hypothalamus. And so in this section, there's an area called the INH3, and he thought he had found microscopic differences in some little dots in there in between the brains, the dead brains, the brains of dead gay men and straight men. He studied like around 20 or so brains. So it wasn't that many. And so he thought there was some kind of intermediate group, which he thought were bisexual. But there were many problems with that study. He studied dead people. It was really difficult to confirm that they were really gay. The other ones were really straight. And then his studies have not been really confirmed on a large scale by other laboratories. And also, when you deal with the brain, because the brain is such a malleable organ, such a plastic organ, it is very difficult to know whether what you see in the brain is the origin, the cause, or the result of your activity. So if this man is a great piano player, and then we open his head again, and we find some little formation in some microscopic, well, we don't know if he's a great piano player because he has that in his brain, or most likely, that is the way in which his brain adapted to his activity of playing the piano. So we don't know if those men had those little dots smaller or whatever because they were gay, or if they were gay because those dots were smaller. So anyway, that's the problem. And then we have the genetic studies on homosexuality. Many of them, I'm not going to discuss, there are many of them, I'm not going to discuss them. I'm just going to tell you about one, which is probably the best known, by Dean Hamer. Dean Hamer. Hamer, H-A-M-E-R, Dean Hamer. Dean Hamer was a closeted gay man in the 1990s, came up with this genetic study. And he feels that he thought he had identified a gay gene. And his observation was that homosexuality tends to cluster in families. So gay men tend to come in clusters in the family, while in the case of straight men, he doesn't see as many gay men around him. Anyway, we'll talk about this complex study later, and we'll see what major flaws there are in his study. Now, what about treatments to cure homosexual men? Well, psychoanalytical treatments, trying to help men to become heterosexual through introspection. Behavioral treatments, electroshocks, trying to associate pleasurable experiences with heterosexual imagery, so having these men masturbate while watching naked women, and then showing them naked men and giving them electroshocks. And so I associate fear and pain with homosexual imagery and pleasure with. You will see some of that in the documentary you need to watch for this week, and Changing Our Minds, again, the life of Dr. Evelyn Hooker. You will see some actual scenes of men being applied electroshocks in the army, actually. Very shocking, right? And that's pretty much it. I mean, there was a lot of work with hormones, although it was clear that hormones wouldn't change the sexual orientation. Gay men were being injected hormones until the 1950s or 60s or even early 70s. And there was even some brain surgery, believe it or not. All they did with brain surgery was simply eliminate all sexual activity, not change it. Okay? Now, the bottom line is there is not a single case on record, not one single case on record of a homosexual man who has become heterosexual through any of these treatments. Not a single case on the medical records. So this is what makes us think, what went wrong? Well, today, homosexuality, so-called, wrongly called homosexuality, is conceptualized as an orientation, a full orientation of the person with an emotional filter. And same-sex sexual attraction is just one more expression of that orientation. So it isn't just one little sexual thing that you can change and then no. You're trying to change the whole person. You need to change the whole person so that that expression, that sexual expression, will also change with it. And you can't change the whole person because we don't even know what we are talking about when we say that. We don't even know where those emotional filters, where those ways of looking at things and conceptualizing social relations, we don't know where that is located in our brain or in our soul or wherever you want to think of it. So we can do it. But definitely you can't change just sexual expression because that is just part of the person. You can change a person's, the color of a person's hand without realizing that if the person is black, so to say, it's the whole person, and that doesn't depend on just changing a hand. You can paint it, but you can't really change just that, thinking that there's nothing else. It's part of a whole. Okay, now let's talk about the next issue. Okay, so first we've talked about the explanations for homosexuality, the two questions. What is the origin of homosexuality? And what causes heterosexuality? And those questions are based on what I call the two wrong assumptions. First of all, the assumption that we know what heterosexuality is all about when we don't, and therefore, if we don't know that, it doesn't make sense to ask for homosexuality since we don't even know what heterosexuality is all about, what causes heterosexuality, so to say. And then the medicalization of homosexuality. Why treating that as a disease, as a medical problem? When a person is sick, what is it that characterizes a disease, a medical problem? Well, the person deteriorates. A person can be sick without being treated for years. The person would die. And the person would want to get well. But that doesn't happen with homosexuality. A person who is homosexual, unless he or she is told that hey, you are sick, they won't think of them as sick. They just, fall in love with whoever they fall in love and want to have sex with whoever they want to have sex and lead their life like anyone else. And so this idea that that is actually, that was, when it was seen as a disease, was in itself wrong. It was based on social prejudice. Okay? Remember Thomas Sass, when he said that when we don't like someone, we just use this label of disease, or you're crazy, that's sick. And that really means we don't like you, that's all. But if we had the power to put those people aside, because we don't like them, to lock them up, and we would do it. And in the case of homosexuality, we did it for a long time. Okay? So those two issues. Now let's talk about another extremely important matter, incidence. Now the word incidence means statistics. Incidence. The incidence, I-N-C-I-D-E-N-C-E. I'm spelling it for the benefit of people who listen to the lecture later. The incidence of homosexuality. That means how many are there? How many homosexual people are there? How many gay men, how many gay women, how many lesbians are there? Are there many of them? Only a few? Now this is important because this will have an effect, will have political ramifications in the way homosexual people are treated. So there are interests at work trying to show that not many people are homosexual on the one side, or that yes, it's a very sizable minority. We'll see now what conclusion we reach here. But I'd like to start first with a question for all of you. And you'll see later why I ask you this question. How many of you in this class, we have here about 30 people, how many of you in this class do not have a friend or are not well acquainted with someone who's gay or lesbian? Raise your hand. not even one. Usually get